Story opens with a tense confrontation between Jimmy McGill, a struggling lawyer, and two detectives from Philadelphia investigating a double murder. Jimmy is representing Mike Ementrout, a former Philadelphia police officer who's clearly the prime suspect. The detectives possess a notepad that seems to contain incriminating evidence, which Jimmy cleverly claims he found in the parking lot as lost property. The conversation reveals that two officers named Fensky and Hoffman were killed, and the detectives believe Mike was involved. There's a suggestion that these officers were corrupt. One detective remarks that the whole precinct was a sore, and many people think Fensky got what was coming to him. Hoffman too. This indicates a history of police corruption that Mike may have taken action against. When the detectives mention questioning Mike's daughter-in-law, Mike remains calm but firm, saying, "If I were to guess, I'd say she wouldn't tell you much. Either way, that's up to her. That's the least I owe her." There's a thinly veiled understanding that the detectives know Mike likely killed the corrupt officers but can't prove it. After the detectives leave, Jimmy presses Mike about what was said, concerned that he might be implicated too. "Those two Philly cheesesteaks, they want to lock me up right alongside you." Mike dismisses Jimmy, stating he no longer requires his services and that the matter is in someone else's hands. This mysterious comment leaves Jimmy frustrated and concerned. The scene establishes Mike's stoic, principled character and Jimmy's nervous but resourceful personality. It shows Jimmy's willingness to bend rules and think on his feet, traits that will later define his Saul Goodman persona. Jimmy visits his brother Chuck's home, discovering him outside counting seconds while standing in the yard, reaching 120 before rushing back inside in distress. Chuck explains he's conducting an experiment to build tolerance to electromagnetic fields, similar to taking small doses of poison to build up an immunity. He explains there's a 60 kilovolt transformer 200 meters southwest of his yard and is trying to acclimate himself to it, hoping to increase his tolerance from 2 minutes to 5 minutes within a week. Chuck's revelation that after what happened with the police and the hospital, "I almost lost everything," refers to a previous incident and shows his determination to overcome his condition. "I have to find a way to get better. I have to get back to work. Sitting here rotting away. This is no kind of life for me." This touches Jimmy deeply, who expresses pride in his brother's efforts. While at Chuck's house, Jimmy brings in case files, claiming he's out of room at the office and needs temporary storage. Chuck questions Jimmy's legal terminology, correcting him when Jimmy mentions 413s instead of the proper 513s for personal property statements. Jimmy brushes this off as confusion from working with seniors, hinting at his new focus on elder LAW. In a separate scene, Jimmy tours an impressive office space with Kim Wexler. The space represents Jimmy's growing ambitions. He wants to appear successful to be successful. He enthusiastically describes having a Cocobolo desk, a word he just likes saying, and shows Kim various offices, including a corner office he's saving for someone. When Kim asks who, Jimmy reveals he's keeping it for her, suggesting they become partners. Kim is touched but declines, explaining she's invested in HHM, Hamlin, and McGill, and feels obligated to them since they paid for her law school. The scene reveals Jimmy's genuine affection for Kim and his desire to build something legitimate, while also showing Kim's loyalty to her current path. The chapter also shows Jimmy conducting a bingo game for seniors, establishing his new focus on elder law. This shift in legal specialty becomes significant as he builds a more legitimate practice, distancing himself from his previous slip-in Jimmy con artist persona, Craig and Betsy Kettleman. Initially, they are represented by HHM, where attorney Kim Wexler presents them with the harsh reality of their situation. Craig is accused of embezzling $1.6 million, and if the case goes to trial, he could face 30 years in prison. Kim has negotiated a plea deal that would limit Craig's sentence to 16 months if he admits guilt and returns the stolen money. The scene at HHM is tense and emotional. When the attorney mentions making the county whole again by returning $1.6 million, Betsy adamantly claims there is no money, despite clear evidence to the contrary. As the lawyer explains the practical benefits of taking the deal, that Craig would serve minimal time and could be starting over in 2 years, the Kettlemans become increasingly agitated. They abruptly fire HHM, with Betsy dramatically telling Craig, "Don't look back, honey. Only look forward. Always in life, look forward." Later, the Kettlemans appear at Jimmy's temporary office during a bingo game for seniors, asking to hire him. Jimmy is surprised, given their previous rejection of his services. Betsy explains they disagreed with their defense strategy at HHM, claiming the firm treated us like we were guilty. They are drawn to Jimmy's passion and can-do attitude, though it's clear they are simply shopping for a lawyer who will declare Craig innocent regardless of evidence. Jimmy, now specializing in elder law, tries to decline their case. The Kettlemans remind him of his previous enthusiasm about representing them, even claiming he'd promised them a not guilty verdict and that they would be client number one, morning, noon or night. When Jimmy excuses himself to use the bathroom, he calls Kim to discuss the situation. Kim explains that the Kettlemans left HHM because the firm treated them like they were guilty, which they are. She urges Jimmy to convince them to return to HHM and take the deal she negotiated, explaining it's their absolute best bet. When Jimmy returns to the Kettlemans, he tries to decline their case and encourages them to return to HHM, but they refuse, insisting there's no money and they want full exoneration. Jimmy then confronts them about the money, recalling their spirited game of tug-of-war over it during a previous encounter. Despite their continued denials, Betsy lets slip a key detail when she says if there were any money, there would have to be a full accounting of it. Every penny would have to be present. She starts to mention the $30,000 before Craig cuts her off, suggesting they've already spent some of the embezzled funds. Do the Kettlemans leave HHM for Jimmy? The repercussions fall heavily on Kim Wexler. When Jimmy visits HHM to collect the Kettleman files, he discovers Kim has been relocated to the East Wing, which Jimmy calls the cornfield, apparently a professional punishment area. When Jimmy confronts Howard Hamlin about this, Howard coldly states, "I'm not gonna discuss my employee policies with you," confirming that Kim is being punished for losing the client. Jimmy finds Kim, who is clearly discouraged, saying, "Best case scenario is my 2-year plan just became a 10-year plan." This reveals Kim's career aspirations have been severely set back. Jimmy apologizes for taking the Kettlemans as clients, but Kim graciously acknowledges he tried to send them back to HHM. Still, she's realistic about Jimmy's chances with the case, warning him, "You'll lose." Kim explains the case details. Kettleman did a terrible job covering his tracks. For starters, they've got reams of checks he wrote for false expenses. I can't even challenge their admission into evidence because he wrote them to himself. Though attorneys aren't supposed to declare their clients guilty, Kim states plainly, he's guilty as sin. When Jimmy suggests there must be some loophole, Kim is definitive, not without the money. It's the only chip those Kettlemans have. They refuse to play it. This conversation is pivotal for Jimmy. He sees Kim, someone he deeply cares about and respects professionally, suffering because of a situation involving his clients. The injustice of Kim bearing the professional consequences while the guilty Kettlemans continue their delusion weighs on him. Later, we see Jimmy looking at a large sum of cash, presumably the Kettlemans' stolen money, with Mike Ehrmantraut. Jimmy declares is doing the right thing, suggesting he's made a moral decision that will help Kim but potentially hurt his own financial interests. When Jimmy asks if they are square, Mike confirms they are, indicating Jimmy may have enlisted Mike's help to obtain the money from the Kettlemans' home. This shows Jimmy's complex moral compass. While he's willing to bend rules and work in gray areas, he can't stand by while Kim suffers for doing her job properly. It reveals his loyalty and affection for Kim, as well as his capacity to choose ethical action when someone he cares about is at stake. Jimmy's plan to set things right. He visits the Kettlemans at their home, noticing they've redecorated since his last visit, suggesting they've been spending the embezzled money on home improvements. Jimmy brings up the deal again, and when the Kettlemans resist, he drops a bombshell. He suggests they check on that money you insist you didn't take in the upstairs bathroom, under the sink. Betsy rushes to check, finding the money gone. In a panic, she confronts Jimmy, who reveals he's sent the money to the DA's desk right about now. The Kettlemans are outraged, calling Jimmy a thief, to which he cleverly responds, "Takes one to know one, doesn't it?" When they threaten to have him arrested, Jimmy points out the flaw in their logic. Criminals have no recourse, and you too. You're criminals. Big time. He explains they need to return to Kim Wexler, apologize for firing her, and take the deal she negotiated. Betsy threatens to reveal Jimmy took a bribe, the $30,000 mentioned earlier, but Jimmy counters that such an admission would implicate her as well. Currently, only Craig faces charges for embezzlement, but revealing the bribe would make Betsy an accomplice. Jimmy demonstrates he's willing to take this risk, stating, "Thing you folks need to know about me. I got nothing to lose." This creates tension between the Kettlemans. Betsy wants to fight, but Craig, realizing the severity of their situation, thinks of their children. "They can't lose us both." This moment humanizes Craig, showing he ultimately cares more about his family than maintaining their facade of innocence. The ends with Craig convincing Betsy to accept reality and take the deal, saying, "It's okay," while Betsy reluctantly gives in. The final scene shows Jimmy back at work, answering his office phone with law offices of James M. McGill, suggesting he's continuing his legitimate practice despite sacrificing what could have been a lucrative client. This resolution highlights Jimmy's complex character. While he's willing to break the law by stealing the money, he does so to serve justice, ensuring the embezzled funds are returned and preventing the Kettlemans from continuing their delusion at Kim's expense. It shows Jimmy's capacity for doing the right thing, even when it costs him financially, particularly when it helps someone he cares about. It also foreshadows Jimmy's future as Saul Goodman, someone who operates outside conventional ethics but maintains a personal code that sometimes aligns with justice.